John, good afternoon. Lovely to see you today.
Thank you, Chris. Good to see you too.
Look, thank you for joining us, because I think that talking about the young is particularly relevant in this marketplace, because there's clearly a very difficult time for schools. And I think there's a big dialogue coming out at the moment about concerns about the future, about, again, how we fight obesity, how we make sure that young are being nurtured. And I know one of the topics we've discussed at the time is how do we prepare children for the workplace and life afterwards better than perhaps has been the case in recent years, which gives us quite a lot to talk about over the next half an hour.
Well, it does. I'm actually looking forward to it, because there is a lot we can put in, and it's interesting how much you go back to first principles when the heat is on. Do you want to open with a question, or do you want me to pontificate for a couple of minutes and we pick up on the bits and pieces?
Let me start off and then I'll join in.
Okay. Well, the thing that I think we have to do, and we mustn't duck it, is to invest in young people. And by that, I mean educate them in what it is they need in terms of nutrition, what their bodies need, what different seasons have on them as different effects, or how they cope with perhaps a period of illness or a period of mental stress in their life. You could pick on a bereavement or an illness as that sort of thing. So what do they have to do to themselves to make themselves more resilient? And if you don't teach them that aged, pick a date, 7, 8, 9, 10, you almost miss the chance of doing it, because then you've got bad habits ingrained and you'll never shift them. So schools really have got to concentrate on this without seeming to concentrate on it, without becoming boring about it, without taking all the fun out of it. And it's one thing I feel passionately about that we could do better. We don't do badly, don't get me wrong, but I think for a 1 or 2% spend extra, you could probably achieve an extra 10 or 15% in effectiveness. Now, how would you ever know you've done it? You never will. You just put the good stuff in terms of knowledge and nutrition into children and let them take their course. It will stick with some, with others.
Yeah, look, I agree. There is an education piece here, isn't there? Because actually, I think everyone's learning about food during this period of time as much as over the last few years. I think everyone's quite enjoying getting back to some basics, actually.
I think you're right. And it's interesting for me looking back on my service career, when you were, as I spent along with a lot of others, time stuck in a ship, food becomes very important. The time it's served, what's on the menu, it's very much a part of it. And that's what we've gone back to doing. Instead of it being a distraction, something you've got to grab and run and go and do the next thing, actually you're beginning to look for meal breaks in the day and look forward to cooking something. And it's that, I think, if there's a good thing out of this crisis, that's perhaps one of them, one of the good factors that's come out of it.
In terms of yourself, in terms of what you're hearing back from Bursars at this point in time, what kind of feedback are you getting? Because it must be incredibly hard for them at the moment, because all the parents must be asking for greater expectations, the schools must be asking for greater security and safety. It must be a particularly difficult job at this time.
It is, and it's not helped by ever-changing guidelines sometimes, or ever differently interpreted guidelines. And then you drop on top of that little matrix of puzzles the fact that local conditions are different. Within 50 miles, you can go from being what is now tier 1 to tier 3 for no apparent reason, perhaps, that we can identify, but somebody has. So you've got all that to deal with, but also you've got the pressure of a slightly wobblier supply chain for things, definitely pressure on cleaning and keeping things fresh and ventilated, and all the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has, you had to do it in order to cope with it. So you've got all that going on, allied with extra costs. And then the bottom of it, of course, you're trying to feed people in a socially distanced way, usually in a hurry, sometimes with menus that you wouldn't necessarily want to do under other circumstances. So it just hits the quality of life aspects for everybody in any organization, not just a school. It hits those square on, and in ways that you don't immediately suspect.
And is it changing the way that Bursars are thinking? Is it changing the way your organizations have to respond as well?
Yes, it is. There's much more anticipation going on, much more planning. The whole sort of integration of the school services to deliver to the customer, pupil, parent, has got, I think, much better, because schools never actually closed. We stayed open along with a lot of state schools for vulnerable children and children of key workers. So they never closed. All that happened was they morphed into this skeletal organization which dealt with those small number of children, and then morphed again from the 1st of June to open partially to the selected year groups, if you remember. And they've just done the same morphing process again to open fully from September. And now they're looking over their shoulders, wondering what's going to happen in half term, how long it's going to be. But they can take great comfort from the fact that they've done everything that can be asked of them. So all they'll be doing is repeating it, applying the lessons and being better at whatever it is they're being asked to operate, whatever environment they're being asked to operate in.
I mean, it's worth just pointing out, obviously, we touched earlier that your background's in the forces. Maybe worth just saying what your background was, because you were a commander in the Royal Navy, weren't you?
It's worse than that. I was a captain. And I have no idea to this day how that happened. I really don't have a clue. But the bottom line was that it was a hackneyed phrase, but it was a true one. You had to feed the machine, because we were a people-operated business. There's lots of mechanization, but actually the bottom line was you have a body there doing whatever it is you want the body to do. So you have to make sure that they get the good stuff into them at the right time, so that when the pressure is on, the work is hard and wet, cold, dark, whatever it happens to be, then people have got something to something to sort of power them on. And you do have to feed the machine.
It does sound like good preparation for this job, I have to say.
Well, it's interesting. It's been useful. I've drawn a lot from it. Let's put it that way.
I can imagine. What's coming into this role? What surprised you the most about how the education, about the challenge of looking after the young?
I think the multiplicity of problems. It's interesting. Well, people are all individuals, obvious point. But those individuals have all got individual expectations of their education. Now, some will be going to the school that their father went to and their grandfather before them. Fine, that's a problem to deal with. Some are new into the sector. Okay, that's a problem to deal with too. They've got to know what it is that you get and what they don't get. And you can have some very interesting conversations with people, just not managing expectations necessarily, but just seeing where their pupil, their son, daughter, can fit better into the school and make the most of the opportunities they're being offered. Because the breadth of education that a school can give, be it state or independent, is colossal, but it's got to be approached in the right way by the parents and the pupils. And that's where the independent schools can score a wee bit more than the state schools do, but the state schools can easily do it too, with the right sorts of teachers. And you get this huge panoply of things that you can make children curious about, and then let them indulge their curiosity. If you can't make them curious, they won't learn.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think we just touched on before, isn't it? Is how do you get the rounded child come out of the other side, isn't it? Because there's been such a focus on results, etc.
Yeah.
But sometimes how you actually the pressure on them is immense nowadays.
It is.
But also, how do you get the rounded person come out the other side? And obviously, that touches on mental health issue as well.
But the other point, of course, and it's like anything else that we do now that we're probably a bit older and more experienced. Instead of thinking your way up to a problem, think your way through it and beyond it. And then the problem's disappeared. It just becomes another day that you do. It's not the end of something. It is actually just a staging post as you go on to something else. And it's like somebody who said, I'm going to go and start that race. No, you're not. You're going to go and finish it. So the start is only a part of it. But it's a difficult thing to get into people's heads. But as soon as you can start doing a little bit of that kind of self-programming of some sort, I don't know the technical term, but it doesn't half help them access all that's available to them. And all then you are doing is the bursar is putting the support services in place that lets that mechanism run.
I mean, the mental health piece has become a major issue, hasn't it, in education as across the whole marketplace in different areas. Do you see greater actions being happening on that piece?
Yes, very much so. And it's one that actually worries of this whole thing, that the thing that bothers me most of all is that hidden damage that we've put in place, because we had to, from March through to September, in everybody involved in any kind of business. It's going to take from now till, pick a date, let's say a year from now, for it to come out, for us to be able to cope with it, and then to begin treating it. So it's a 2 or 3 year problem, because people are carrying a colossal anxiety, either whether it's over what's happening to their jobs personally, their families, the country, the way the government's handling things, the noises coming out of other countries that's happening. I mean, this is all building an anxiety level which doesn't normally exist. And that's going to have to be, to use the wrong sort of phrase, defused, dealt with, coped with in some way. And it's not going to be an overnight job, that definitely not. And it shows it's work. The organisations are working very hard on everybody's mental well-being.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? Because I think most of the parents are glad the children are going back. Because I think the homeschooling has tested the parents to the ultimate. But actually, for the children, that's such a long period without seeing their friends and the social interactions.
Yeah, and then of course you've got pupils who really don't want to. They become slightly agoraphobic. And of course, anxious parents who don't want the children to go back for various reasons. And you've got everybody on the spectrum, from, as you say, the poor parent who has worked very hard to homeschool their child, the child wants to go, to the other one who's saying, well, actually, I prefer you were here because I know what you're up to and you're safe. So you've got all of that to deal with. And every point in between. It's very, very awkward for schools, and more so for parents. I think a lot of parental relationships will have been either formed, reformed, or damaged in this period.
Oh, I'm sure. I know a lot of parents are relieved.
Yeah, there will be a lot of those.
In terms of going into food service, because obviously we talk a lot about the importance of food service, what would you like to see happen now? Because I know you've obviously run some successful conferences in the past, previous period, and I know we've had long discussions about that this is such an important topic on your radar. What would you like to see happen?
If I could sit everybody in education down in a room, I would teach them about the effect that good nutrition has on the brain. You may remember one consultant we had, and I can't remember her name, and she talked about the nerve that connects the gut to the brain. I think it was called the Janus nerve. Is that correct? Technical term. Can't remember. I think it's that one. Anyway, that is the key to success. Getting that to work and getting brains to engage as a consequence of good nutrition has got to be the message that we're driving home. Now, what comes out of that then is decent menu planning and working out where in the day you can fit these bits of nutrition in. And we are dreadful for being completely hidebound. 9 till 5. Well, why? What are we doing that for? With some younger children, you might want to do a little bit earlier, or some other children you want to start at 12 and work till late in the evening. We are dire and actually taking the body's circadian rhythm and working to it. We want to box everybody into 9 till 5 or 8 till 4, whatever it happens to be. So we need to firstly understand nutrition, and secondly start to understand the body rhythms that people have. People, I mean broadly. And see if we can do better, because we're very efficient as little machines, but we're just not very good at organizing ourselves to make the best of the efficiency.
That's quite an education, isn't it? Because it's only recently that people have woken up to this. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. It is. But think back to the days where we were completely ignorant of this. I mean, you felt better in the morning after you've had a decent steak for dinner the night before. Oh yeah. Now, why is that again? Or, some protein source that you perhaps aren't used to having. And there's a lot going with it, but you can't isolate just the nutritional part of it. It's got to build into the day, and it's not just a school day, but any kind of day, sufficient time and space to enjoy what it is you're eating, or at least appreciate it. Because if you don't, it just becomes, it's a flash and a bang and it's gone and you're on to the next email. Well, for goodness sake, what a waste.
Well, I think people have actually, during this period, have actually woken up to food, and there's a lovely survey that people have bought 30% more fresh food recently.
Really?
Yeah, so you're going to get the hope that actually people have enjoyed eating fresh produce again.
I do hope. I do hope. Are we going to see the return to seasonal vegetables, do you think? Or are we going to?
Well, apparently, yes. I think that's the argument that we will do. Whether that comes out the other end, we'll wait and see. But it'll be interesting, won't it?
We have, of course, got that other anxiety of Brexit to deal with too, which is.
I know, that's why.
Yeah. It's going to have effect on our food supply for sure, because I think we import some huge amount, 40% of our food. You probably know the stats better than me, but I know it's bigger than you'd imagine.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I mean, one of the, I had an email this week from someone, which I thought was quite thought-provoking, that we've got to start preparing the young now for very hard times to come. And actually how we mentally, because actually there is going to be long-term unemployed. We're probably going to see a two-tier society potentially emerge after this period of time, which is obviously going to affect the young and how they come out. It's also going to impact on yourselves as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I hadn't I mean, why hadn't I acknowledged that? I think I probably had, but I hadn't thought about it. I think you're right. We've already got a two-tier society. It's just that the separation at the moment is the very wonderful furlough system. Somebody rather gloomily said to me, well, we've already got X million unemployed. They just don't know it yet.
Well, I think they know it now.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been one of the hardest, I think, couple of weeks. I think most people. So I think people are obviously going through that process now, which is quite sad for people.
Yeah, but you then get into the debate, and I hope somebody's having it at the national level, of which sectors do you support and which do you say, right, forget that one, we'll go and find work somewhere else. There's a friend of ours, one of their daughter's friends has just trained as a chef and was looking to go into a nice restaurant in London and has decided not to do that. She's now gone to work for Home Fresh. You may know the company that delivers fresh ingredients to people in meal-sized chunks. And she sees her future as that. So what that means to me is she's got the basic skills that she can use. She's got the perspicacity to see that the market's changed. She's managed to reorientate herself away from being one of the many chefs in the Savoy and all that brings to her CV. And she's gone to work in a warehouse near Northampton, for example. But the point is that she's got a market there that she will be able to make a dent in and hopefully make a future in. But we do need to accept that there are going to be changes in sectors various.
Well, I think the hard bit here is for the young. It's actually seeing hope. And that's one of the conversations we have all the time. We find is it can get a bit bleak at the moment because everyone's looking at another 6 months of these pandemic, probably at least. And actually, as young ones, particularly leaving school now and going to university, which is obviously quite a challenge, is how we prepare people. It's going to get that pressure is going to grow all the time.
But it's interesting, isn't it? You mentioned universities. There's a sector that we've supported because it used to be that you sat in a multi-tiered conference room and listened to some erudite professor at the front dropping pearls of wisdom for 20 minutes and went off and wrote something clever yourself. Well, that can be done online. Why are we even thinking about doing it any other way? So we've really got to rethink this whole thing from the ground up as to how we get this education, you're quite right, into people and then let them make the choices, give them the sectors and let them make the choices how they can contribute to society.
And that's what yeah, it is. And actually, look, for me, as you know, I come from a bit of a biased one. It's how we create social interaction as well, make that better. Yes. I think friendship and relationships are still central to everything.
Yes, they are. Otherwise, we all become those very strange people that we thought were odd at school that sat in the corner at the back and read Lord of the Rings. You know, they never talked to anybody. But you're absolutely right. You've got to find this, but you've got to do that within whatever social framework this pandemic allows us. And what's the gloomy part of this, and I take completely your point about the lack of hope, is that no one can tell you accurately how long the antibodies last once you've had this bug, and therefore how long we're going to have to be in under these sorts of restrictions, and what these restrictions will look like in 6 months' time. And that really is the depressing part.
Oh, look, it's terrible for everybody at the moment, isn't it? And that's why we just need some light. Let's find light, I think, somewhere along the line, and some humour as well as we get there. I think. In terms of the schools, how do you see the next 6 months, year panning out beyond? Because it's not going to get easier for you, is it?
No, it's not at all. And we have taken the opportunity during the last 6 months and continued through this up till Christmas to really get as much information available to the school's management and governance teams as we can. And what we're doing really is, as with anything, is you're getting the information out there. People can sift through it, work out what works for them, and see where their plans have to change in order to cope with the trading conditions, pick a date, at the 1st of January 2021. Now, that's an enabling function. You can go so far with that, but what you're still looking for is the individual who, with a team of other individuals around him or her, can come up with that sparkly idea that takes a business forward and makes people invest in it, either in their time or their money or effort. So yeah, we see that as our function at the moment, and it's working well. We're getting as much out there as we decently can in methods that we never considered 9 months ago. But we don't know what the results are going to be. So you're kind of shooting in the dark to some degree, but you have to have faith in those that are involved in the various businesses that they will button into this and use it.
I mean, I was very kindly your guest at the Bursars dinner last year, which seems like another decade ago, doesn't it? But they are incredibly, it struck me, and it is an incredibly nice atmosphere and nice group of people that you're working with. And do you find that everyone wants to learn during this period of time?
Very much so. And they all want to learn from each other as well, because one of the jobs that I have is running what we call our advice and guidance service. And we have got a lot of people who contribute to the documents that we put out. So what you have in, we have run an online library as part of it. What you have in this library is a collection of people's comments and ideas, snags, issues, difficulties, solutions. So you end up with a sort of best possible practice, pragmatic type solution to any problem. And the other lovely thing about it is you can post on the forum that we run, you know, I've got a problem with this. Has anybody come across it before? And you can bet your life somebody will have done. And if they haven't, then that's really interesting, because that gives you something new to deal with, which has got an attraction of its own.
I think it's one of the interesting things about this period. As tough as it is, it's probably the time people have been most open-minded, I've noticed.
Yeah.
Everyone's open to things. Moving on to a new subject, which I know is close to your heart, leadership, young leadership. Mm-hmm. How do you think the children, young people today are different, and how are they, do you think they're coming through? Because everyone talks and badges each generation, don't they, quite severely? It's not often unfairly, but what are your views on this?
I think we've probably got the best generation coming through now that we've seen for ages. I think they're way better than we ever were. I happily put my hand up to the fact that we've bogged it completely. But
well, I think that's actually quite true. I think we're very worldly, but not always very good.
We'll gloss over that. But the one thing that we must do is to make sure that we equip the forthcoming generations, the sort of 1, 2 down from us, with everything we can possibly do. We always complain they never listen. Actually, they do. There's a lot being absorbed. And I think we're going to see some very, very clever people coming through, the benefits of some of the education they've got now and the way they can access information, but better still, the way they can discriminate from good stuff and absolutely appallingly bad information, because there's a deluge of it. Is way better than I ever was, speaking personally. I mean, I always accepted everything that came at me. Yeah, fine, great, move on. But actually, they're much more savvy. Maybe they've had to be. And therefore, I think the leadership that we will see in 10, 15, 20 years' time will be eye-wateringly good. As I'm sitting in my bath chair being pushed along the Portsmouth seafront, I should reflect on that and hope that that's actually true.
Look, I agree with you. I think some of the young talent I see is phenomenal, actually. Yeah. And some of the maturity actually puts us to shame.
Well, it does. And they tackle problems in a much more open-minded way, and delightfully with a lot less of the preconceived prejudices I think our generation had. You've got to be very careful about including you in this. You probably had a much different upbringing to me, but as a West of Scotland male brought up as a Protestant, I had all kinds of prejudices that I was carrying with me. And it took me till I was about 25 to ditch them and actually realize that people were, all the same, and all we had to do was get on with it.
That's part of the fun, though, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Part of the journey, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. Yeah.
The Swedes always believe that you never bond together until you cook together. Yeah. Which always occurs. That would it be great to actually get cookery lessons really back into the school curriculum a bit and get people learning those skills?
Yes, it would. And I mean, there's a lot of it happening with various food technology classes and things and doing that, but they don't, it's one period in a week, 40 minutes. Seriously? That should be 4 times a day and fit other stuff around about it. I mean, if we're going to do this properly, it's got to be more regularly done and to a deeper depth. So people understand tastes, flavors, nutrition, vitamins, all of the things that you can very easily get rid of when you cook badly or cook wrongly.
But one of the things our generation was very good at was the social skills. We may not always be the best at class, but our social skills are normally first class. And actually, I think that's one of the things I think is really important to nurture, isn't it? Is how people build that camaraderie. Because particularly around the workplace, it always worries me about all the stress figures coming out, that people seem to not have the fun that we did, probably.
I think you're right, because the working environment now has changed completely. You're in a little office pod with yourself and your 2 screens, or 3 screens, or 4 screens, whatever it happens to be, and you're doing this kind of meeting. You're not actually walking down to a conference room, tripping over somebody, and saying, "Can I get you a cup of coffee?" I mean, it's basic human level interaction, and it's interesting. All the work we've done online, I don't know how you've done it with the agencies that we've done. All of those relationships are based on the fact that we have at one stage met, and we know each other, and therefore you've got perhaps a wrongly conceived idea of who it is you're talking to, but it makes your screen time much more trustworthy. It fits better into your psyche. I don't know if that's an age thing. It may be that younger generations are different.
No, we did a hotel conference, a very interesting comment that Zoom is great for maintaining a relationship, but you'll never develop a relationship.
I think that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, we need to get back to real life to develop that, and that's the people's biggest hope in some ways.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's something we need to reestablish as quick as we decently can too. It's difficult to see how and when, but it's going to have to be done, because I think we've probably maximized this crisis in the work practices that we've used as far as we can. We're probably just about to bump up into the top limit, where we do need to start opening up various relationships with different, or various networks with different people.
Yeah, I think people have reached their limit now. I mean, 6-7 months is a long period of time, and talking to people, you can feel that they are straining now. I think they enjoyed the summer, rightly or wrongly, guiltily. I think most of them quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Now I think it's a real strain.
Well, that's true, and you talk to people who during the summer, you're quite right, you're saying things like, well, does this actually have to end? We're getting quite good at this now. Yeah. We're a bunch of herd people. We have to herd together at some point.
Yeah.
The question is when and how do we do it?
Yeah, absolutely right. So, John, magic wand, what would you like to see? If you have a magic wand, what would you like to see change as we come out of all this?
As we come out of this, in schools or generally?
Both.
Both. Okay. Start with schools first. Let's get rid, if we can, of the exam pressure. Let's find a way of assessing children at the end of their school time that tells them what their talents are, what they've learned, where they think they're going, and put them on that road. Let's not give them artificial hurdles. That's the school thing. And generally, I would make everybody cook for 2 hours a day.
Are you a good cook?
I get by. I'm okay.
John, thank you so much for your time today. It's really appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
Some great comments, so thank you very much.
Bye now.